What if the quiet coffee girl at a desert base was actually a ghost from the Black Ops world, written off as dead, but never defeated? When a recon team is ambushed and command freezes, she vanishes, only to reappear where no one expects, changing the tide in silence. Welcome to my channel. You ever walk past a tent full of officers and feel the heat of silence snap toward you like a live wire? That's what happened the morning it all started. I was carrying 2 crates of ration packs past the command tent in Dagger Base, a remote desert outpost outside Santa Fe, New Mexico, when someone barked loud enough to freeze the air. Hey, what's the coffee girl doing that close to the TOC? The Tactical Operations Center, full of maps, missions, and people too important to remember names like mine. Move her out of there, the same voice snapped. Support staff doesn't loiter by mission command. I kept walking, didn't flinch, just tucked my chin a little lower, adjusted my cap, and kept my hands steady on the crates. I delivered supplies to more tents than I could count, and that wasn't the first time someone decided I didn't belong. But then something happened. Static burst over the base-wide radio, then came a voice. Cold, tight, metallic. Enemy chatter, intercepted from a signal team northwest of us. Repeat, seeking operative known as Ghost Wren. Confirmed in the sector. Engage if spotted. The air changed, not because of the words, but because of the name. Every officer in that tent turned. I searched the dirt where I'd stood just a moment before. But I was gone. Vanished. They never even saw me slip away. Now, you might wonder why enemy forces would target someone like me. On paper, I was just a logistics worker named Harper Quinn. 38 years old. No rank. No ribbons. Just another cog in the background. I filed paperwork. Ran inventory. Carried coffee, crates, and silence. No one asked where I'd come from. No one ever asked why I moved like I already knew what was coming. But that's the thing about ghosts. We move quiet. We blend in. Until you remember to ask what made the shadows start shifting. And that name? Ghost Wren? Yeah, that used to be me. Back when I first showed up at Dagger Base, nobody asked for my story. The supply officer barely glanced at my transfer file. Just saw non-combat logistics and a recommendation from somewhere higher up and waved me through. I think he was just relieved I wasn't another hot-headed private begging for frontline action. Paperwork, supply runs, and food service? That's where they dumped folks who didn't cause trouble. And I didn't. I made it easy to overlook me. Always on time. Kept my gear squared away. Said, yes, sir, and no, ma'am. Wore my hair tucked into a dull gray cap. Not the standard issue one, just something I picked up at a gas station in Amarillo years back. Faded and forgettable. Like me. But some folks noticed, just not for the reasons I'd hoped. There was a junior officer, Lieutenant Rowley, who used to smirk every time I walked by. Thought he was God's gift to military command because he'd graduated top 30% at some East Coast academy. Real proud of his drone tactics lectures. I caught him one day whispering to his buddies outside the chow tent. She probably worked in HR at some desk job and figured this gig came with air conditioning and snacks. Another one snorted. Watch, she's gunning for a transfer to Intel. Bet she thinks running coffee makes her part of the action. They called me Coffee Ghost behind my back. Thought it was clever. But there was something else too. I'd seen it in the eyes of a few seasoned NCOs, guys who'd been around since Fallujah or Kandahar. When I dropped off crates of munitions, they noticed how I arranged them. Not just dropped and stacked, but placed with field access in mind. Medkits right beside ammo. Breach charges aligned by door type. Gear tagged for speed, not just inventory. It wasn't conscious. It was muscle memory. One of them, Staff Sergeant Boone, eyed the layout once and muttered, huh, that's how we used to do it back in Falcon teams. He didn't know how close he was to the truth. But no one looked deeper. Not really. They figured I was just weird. Or X something. Probably had a failed training stint somewhere and got dumped here. And I didn't correct them. Didn't say I once led ops that didn't exist. Didn't mention what happened the night my last mission turned to ash in the dark. Didn't tell them how I'd held a line alone for 18 minutes after my team was ambushed on the western edge of Wadi Halfa. Didn't say the names of the 12 soldiers I couldn't save. I buried that life. I wrapped it up in guilt, tied it with silence, and left it behind. But you can't bury everything. Not really. The ground always remembers. And that day, when the radio flared with my old call sign, Ghost Wren, I knew someone out there hadn't forgotten either. The thing that shook them most wasn't the intercepted enemy broadcast. It was that name. Ghost Ren. No one on base recognized it. Not the rookies. Not the duty officer. Not even the tactical analysts glued to their screens in the comms tent. But I did. And so did someone else. Back in the corner of the maintenance yard, sitting on an oil drum with a busted bootlace and a nicotine patch half peeling off his wrist, was a man who hadn't spoken 5 words to me since I'd arrived. Master Sergeant Elijah Rames. Retired and recalled. Vietnam-era temper stuffed into an Iraq-era skeleton. He'd seen too much and didn't care who knew it. That morning, when the radio flared with that old call sign, I passed right by him, same as I did every morning. But this time he looked up. "You know," he said low, not quite to me, not quite to himself. They used to say Ghost Ren didn't breathe loud enough to catch on thermal. I didn't stop walking, just tilted my cap forward and kept going. But my heart stuttered. He knew. He wasn't guessing. He wasn't bluffing. He knew. And then I realized something else. If Rames knew, then others might too. Word spreads fast in places like Dagger Base. Doesn't matter how far out we are or how deep the sand runs. Rumors ride radio waves, faster than transport helos. By nightfall, people were staring. Not openly, not obviously, but with that sideways look soldiers get when they think they've just heard something they shouldn't. I felt it when I dropped off documents at command. When I crossed the motor pool to refill the water cooler. When I stepped into the mess tent and heard the laughter hush a second too late. And still no one said anything to me. Not directly. Except the lieutenant. Rowley. Same smug grin, same clipped voice. "You hear that nonsense earlier?" he said, tossing a ration bar at a wall like it owed him money. "Ghost Ren. Sounds like something from a bad comic book. Bet some insurgent just read the wrong name off a faulty intel feed." He turned toward me. "Quinn, didn't you do paperwork for a unit called Ren or something?" I didn't answer. Just looked at him, blank and steady. He chuckled. "Didn't think so. Must have been someone important though, huh? For the enemy to name-drop her." I walked away. But deep inside, something flared. Not anger. Not pride. Something else. A shift in the ground beneath the grave I'd buried my old life in. You can only pretend to be invisible for so long before someone notices the footprint. It was the next day when the name stopped being rumor and became mockery. They'd spray-painted it on the side of a rusted-out Jeep behind the barracks. Big, crooked letters. Ghost Ren's mobile latte unit. Complete with a hand-drawn coffee cup and a halo. The joke made the rounds before sunrise. One of the junior comms techs snapped a pic, passed it around group chats like a party flyer. I passed by it around 0600 on my way to the forward trailhead. Didn't pause. Didn't even blink. Just kept moving. But I felt it. The heat crawling up my neck. The burn under my skin. They didn't know what the name meant. Not really. They thought it was just something the enemy had pulled out of a dusty dossier. A relic. A label to mess with our heads. To them, Ghost Ren sounded like a made-up specter. Some bedtime story for battlefield rookies. So when I showed up at Ridgepoint Outpost that afternoon with mission files strapped in a rucksack and sunburn bleeding into the back of my collar, the joke started almost before my boots hit the gravel. Lieutenant Rowley was standing near a sandbag line with his squad, running half-hearted drills like they were auditioning for a parade, not prepping for combat. "Look who made it," he shouted loud enough for the whole perimeter to hear. Ghost Ren herself. "Did you fly in on your broomstick, or did you run out of espresso?" A wave of laughter followed. Too loud, too forced. They thought they were clever. Thought they were being harmless. They had no idea. None of them knew what that name had cost me. What it still cost me every time I closed my eyes. Every time I heard a radio hiss in the dark. I stopped, turned slowly, and for one flicker of a second, I looked at him. Really looked. And whatever he saw in my eyes, it shut him up. Just for a second. Just long enough for the laughter to die. That look had once made warlords call off raids. Had made arms dealers surrender without a shot fired. It was the look of someone who'd been to the edge and crawled back with pieces missing, but teeth still bared. Then I turned and walked away. They thought I walked away in shame. But what they didn't know? That night, I didn't cry because of them. I cried for the 12 names etched into the inside flap of my old combat notebook. Names I hadn't spoken out loud since the mission that broke me. Reed. Alvarez. Dunn. Voss. Templeton. They were the ones who mattered. Not some spray paint on a rusted Jeep. And certainly not Lieutenant Rowley and his Sandpit Command Squad. It started around 2,100 hours. The radio room caught a garbled distress call from a recon team operating near Mesa Ridge, about 15 miles northeast of Dagger Base. Known hot zone. Sparse coverage. Too far for air support. Even farther for reinforcements on foot. The message barely made it in. Ridgepoint Alpha. Ambush. Hostile fire. Multiple wounded. Request immediate evac. Then nothing. Static. The duty officer, a green-faced second lieutenant with a clipboard bigger than his courage, stammered through protocol. We wait for command authorization. Sitrap. Terrain assessment. We can't just deploy without a full tactical read. I was in the comms tent when it came through. Dropping off gear requisition logs, like always. Just another background errand. But the moment that call hit the room, I knew. My hands started to tremble. Not from fear. From the surge. It was like waking up from a deep sleep with your heart already sprinting. I saw the map. Saw the red dot blinking in the corner. Saw the choke points, the fallback trails, the bottlenecks they hadn't even marked. In 10 seconds flat, I'd already run the route in my head. And in 15, I knew something else. They wouldn't survive the wait. Command wouldn't authorize a response for at least 45 minutes. Maybe longer. Red tape takes time. Even when it bleeds. I looked around the room. No one moved. Not one of them. They just watched the screen flicker. I turned and walked out without a word. Went straight to Storage Unit 6B. Used an old key code I wasn't supposed to have. The one I'd never erased from muscle memory. Inside, I found the crate. Dust-covered. Unlabeled. Locked in a corner like it had been forgotten by everyone but me. My gear was still there. Body armor. Lightweight Kevlar. Same cut I wore on my last op sidearm. Custom grip. Balance still perfect. My rifle. Suppressed. Zeroed at 150. I slipped into the gear like I'd never taken it off. It didn't feel right. It felt true. By 21:30, I was in the canyon trail, moving fast and low. No backup. No comms. Just instinct. The terrain was rough. Steep ridges, unstable shale, long drops. Most soldiers would have taken the safe route. But I wasn't most. I moved like wind. Like memory. Like something the earth forgot but hadn't forgiven. And 14 minutes later, I found them. Pinned behind broken boulders. Return fire sporadic. One man down, another with blood streaking down his arm. For left. Surrounded. They hadn't even seen me coming. But the enemy did. Too late. I moved methodical. Clean. Precise. Like an echo of the woman I used to be. No wasted shots. No panic. Just decisions. In under 5 minutes, it was over. The team was still alive. One of them, barely 20, face streaked with dust and blood, looked up at me through bleary eyes and said, "Ma'am, who the hell are you?" I didn't answer. Didn't need to. Because at that very moment, back at Dagger Base, the intercepted radio frequency cracked to life again. This time, from the enemy. Their voice trembled. "All units, fall back. I repeat, fall back. Ghost Wren is on the ground." They didn't believe it at first. The officers at Dagger Base just stared at the comms unit like it had spoken in tongues. "Repeat that transmission," someone ordered. The radio tech, pale and visibly shaken, rewound the intercepted broadcast and played it again. Slower. "Ghost Wren is on the ground." 3 seconds of dead silence followed. Then came the domino effect. Eyes snapped toward the map board. Someone dropped a coffee mug. The duty officer who'd mocked me just yesterday stood frozen, white as snow, lips working but no sound coming out. Then Commander Halvorsen walked in. Now, Halvorsen was a career officer. Tight jaw. Polished boots. The kind of man who'd read 5 files before shaking your hand, but always forgot your name anyway. He wasn't sentimental. He didn't scare easy. But when he heard that name, my name, he stopped mid-stride. He stared at the radio, then turned slowly, gaze scanning the room. "Where is she?" he asked quietly. No one answered. Because I wasn't back yet. I was still in the canyon, crouched beside a wounded private, packing his bleeding leg with gauze and instinct. The rest of the team sat in stunned silence, trying to process what had happened. Who had just pulled them out of the jaws? When the evac bird finally arrived, the flight medic leaned out of the chopper and looked at me like he'd seen a ghost in combat boots. "You Quinn?" he asked over the rotor wash. I nodded. "No one knew you were even gone." I didn't answer. Didn't need to. Because something had already started spreading, faster than gossip, deeper than rumor. By the time I stepped off the bird and back onto base, the sun was rising. The air was pink with early light, quiet with that hush before the world remembers its spinning. And the base? It was wide awake. Commander Halvorsen was waiting just outside the tarmac fence, still in full dress. No clipboard, no briefing packet. Just him and his eyes and a phone clenched tight in his hand. He didn't speak right away, just looked at me. I stopped 3 paces in front of him, gear still strapped tight, sweat soaked into my collar, dirt crusted into my sleeves. "Major Harper Quinn," he said finally. I said nothing. "You were declared Kia," he continued, almost gently. "March 18th, Operation Echo Ledge. 0 survivors. 0 bodies. Intel said you went down with your team." I still said nothing. He exhaled slowly. "Except that wasn't the truth, was it?" I shook my head. "Just once." "No, sir." He nodded. Something heavy settled in his shoulders. "I've spent the last hour on a secured line," he said. "Took 3 levels of clearance to pull the file. Even then, I could only view it. Couldn't save it. Couldn't print it." He paused. "I saw what you did. What your team did. What you gave up." Behind him, a few base personnel were watching, pretending they weren't. "You didn't have to come back," he said. "You could have stayed hidden." I looked past him, toward the horizon where the recon team had been pulled out. "They weren't going to make it," I said quietly. I couldn't sit and watch another red dot blink out. His expression didn't change, but I saw something flicker in his eyes. Regret, maybe. Respect, definitely. "Come with me," he said. And for the first time in 3 years, I followed an order that wasn't whispered only in my head. The command office felt smaller than I remembered. Cleaner too. Like someone had scrubbed away the war stains and replaced them with polished rank boards and just enough patriotic posters to feel official. Commander Halvorsen didn't sit behind his desk. He stood beside it. He motioned for me to sit in the chair across from him, but I didn't move. "I'm not here to debrief," I said. "You're not under review," he replied. "You're under recognition." I blinked. That word felt foreign. Halvorsen reached over and tapped a key on his secured terminal. The screen flashed dark, then loaded a file that hadn't seen daylight in years. Phoenix Operative Registry. Designation, Ghost Wren. Name, Major Harper Quinn. Status, presumed Kia. Operation Echo Ledge. March 18th, 2021. Then came the rest. Hostage extractions. Deep recon raids. Blackout recoveries under 0 visibility conditions. A list of missions so redacted they looked like a chessboard of black lines and names struck through with silence. He scrolled slowly, until stopping on a single photo. It was me, gear on, helmet off, standing with my team outside a downed aircraft in northern Sudan. We looked like something out of a legend. Not because we were smiling, but because we were still standing. I hadn't seen that picture in years. Didn't even know anyone had kept it. The sight of their faces, Reed, Alvarez, Dunn, Templeton, Voss, punched the breath from my chest. "They were the best," I said. "I read every report I could access," Halvorsen replied. "They didn't die because of you." He leaned in. "You were betrayed. Someone inside our own networks sold your team out." My stomach dropped. "You're sure?" "Positive. We've confirmed it in the last year. It wasn't tactical failure. It was intel sabotage. You walked into an ambush you never had a chance to see coming." I looked at the floor, at the weight gathering in my chest like storm clouds refusing to rain. "I've carried that loss every day," I said. "Every step I took on base. Every time they mocked me. Every time they asked me for extra cream and 2 sugars." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You don't have to carry it alone anymore." That's when the knock came at the door. It creaked open, and in stepped Lieutenant Rowley. The same Rowley who'd called me a joke. Who painted the Jeep. Who made me the punchline of every whisper on base. He looked different now. Like a man walking into church after learning the person he mocked was the one who built the altar. He stood rigid, like his uniform was suddenly heavier. "Sir," he stammered. We didn't know." Commander Halvorsen gestured for him to speak. Rowley turned to me, eyes lowered. "I made jokes. I treated you like background. And I didn't know I was talking to someone who's done more than half of us ever will." He swallowed hard. "I'm sorry, Major." The silence in the room was thick. Finally, I looked at him. "I'm not asking for apologies," I said. "But I am asking for something better." He straightened. "Learn from this," I said. "So the next time you see someone you think is unremarkable, you ask where they've been, not why they're here." Rowley nodded slowly. And then he did something unexpected. "Ma'am," he said, Would you ever consider training us? It was the first time he called me anything with respect. I looked at Halvorsen, who gave a slight nod. Then back at Rowley. Maybe, I said, letting the edge of a smile sneak through. If you're willing to show up at 0600 sharp and leave your pride at the door. The next morning, something had shifted. Not in the air, not in the layout of the base, but in the way people moved. Straighter backs, fewer smirks, less side-eye, and more stillness when I walked by. Respect doesn't announce itself. It hangs in silence like a storm holding its breath. I stepped into the mess hall at dawn, same as I always had, ready to prep the first batch of coffee and organize the day's supply requests. But my usual seat? Someone had left something on it. A folded piece of black fabric, stitched in gold thread. A unit patch. Sharp edges. Bold letters. Phoenix Operative. Major Harper Quinn, Ghost Wren. I stood there for a long second, not moving. My fingers brushed the embroidery, light, unsure. It had been 3 years since anything tied to that name had touched my hands. The young lieutenant, Rowley, stood nearby, watching, nervous as a kid with a confession. We chipped in, he said. Had it made overnight. Thought maybe it was time you wore what you actually are. I looked at him. He didn't flinch this time. Before I could answer, more soldiers filed into the mess. Not one reached for a tray. Not one walked past me. They lined up, quiet, still, waiting. At the front of the line was the duty officer who once kicked me out of a restricted zone. His face was a blend of guilt and grit. Major, he said, I owe you a debt of apology. For everything. I didn't know who I was talking to. Didn't act like a leader should. He paused. I'd be honored if you let me buy your coffee this morning. And just like that, the others followed. One by one, apologies came. From the squad medic who once laughed when I carried too many crates. From the comm specialist who joked I took notes better than action. From the same NCOs who doubted every move I made. But the one that struck me most came from Staff Sergeant Boone, the man who'd once muttered something about my supply patterns. We always knew something was off about you, he said. Not bad off, just different. Like muscle memory that didn't come from warehouse duty. Should have trusted our gut. I nodded once. Words didn't come easy right then. When the last voice fell silent, I looked around. This wasn't the same base I'd walked into months ago. This was a unit ready to listen. I didn't come here to lead again, I said quietly. I came here to disappear. After what happened to my team, I thought being invisible was the price. I held up the patch, fingers running along the edge. But maybe hiding and healing aren't the same thing. And maybe it's time I stop running from what I used to be. I looked them dead in the eyes. All right, I said. You want to learn? We start tomorrow. 0600. Situational awareness. Tactical adaptability. Everything the books don't teach. Bring your gear. Bring your questions. And bring the part of you that's willing to be wrong. Because that's where real learning begins. There was a pause. Then someone, quietly, started clapping. Others joined. No cheers. Just steady, solemn applause. And for the first time in years, I smiled. Not the mask I wore while pouring coffee. A real one. And when I pinned that patch to my uniform, it didn't feel like reclaiming something. It felt like coming home. At 0600 the next morning, they showed up. Not just Rowley and his fire team, but the full spread. Infantry, comms, even a few engineers who normally had no business sweating through drills. Some were nervous. Some curious. All were ready. I didn't waste time. No flowery intros. No long speeches. Just a whiteboard, a terrain map, and a single sentence written in chalk. What don't you see? That became the theme of everything I taught. Not just how to breach a room, but how to feel when something was off. How to read posture before a fight starts. How to hear what isn't said on the radio. How to see patterns in how the enemy stores their gear, because that tells you where they plan to strike. I didn't teach them how to shoot faster. I taught them how to know when not to shoot. Situational awareness. Pattern disruption. Anticipation. Every lesson was built on what I'd learned the hard way. On black ops that never made the news. On close calls where the difference between survival and a body bag was measured in half seconds and intuition. And they ate it up. Rowley surprised me the most. Gone was the swagger. He took notes like his life depended on it. Asked questions that showed he wasn't just listening. He was changing. Same with the duty officer. The one who'd once barked me out of a command meeting now stayed behind after every session to help clean up. He stopped calling me ma'am, out of obligation, and started saying it like it meant something. I still poured coffee each morning. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. It wasn't camouflage anymore. It was connection. Each cup I handed out came with a story, a tip, a quiet word. Troops started lining up early, not for caffeine, but for those moments. The stillness before the storm. The wisdom between sips. Major, a new recruit asked one morning, how do you spot someone's real skill when they're trying to stay invisible? I didn't answer right away. Just thought back to all the days I walked this base unseen, unremarked. You don't look at what they do, I finally said. You look at how they do it. Real excellence, it leaks out, even when they try to bury it. That became something of a mantra at Dagger Base. And something else changed too. Enemy activity dropped. Not because we threw more firepower into the region, but because my trainees were sharper now, more alert. They caught ambush setups before they sprung. Noticed irregular footprints in sand, the missing radio clicks, the inconsistencies in chatter. They weren't faster. They were smarter. That's what keeps people alive. And the most unexpected ripple? Omar Qasim, the warlord who once ordered my name, whispered with dread across enemy channels. Word came in that he'd moved operations out of the region entirely. Took half his network with him. No official report tied it to me, but the timeline told its own story. Some shadows are so wide they stretch across borders. But legacy? It's quieter than that. I didn't care about medals or write-ups. I cared that soldiers now looked at each other differently. Asked what they didn't know. Treated silence not as weakness, but as possible depth. Camp Dagger learned something new. Before dismissing someone as unimportant, ask what story you haven't heard yet. It was evening when it hit me. Not in a flash of drama or some poetic moment of closure. Just a slow, settling truth. I was standing near the perimeter fence, looking out over the stretch of desert that used to feel like exile. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in streaks of violet and orange. The kind of beauty war zones aren't supposed to offer, but do, sometimes, when no one's watching. Footsteps crunched behind me. I didn't turn. Major. Rowley's voice was soft now, almost careful. I nodded without looking. He came up beside me, quiet, respectful. Not the kid who once laughed at my call sign. Someone else entirely now. I've been thinking, he said. About before. When you were just Harper, the supply lady. I smirked. He caught it. I never asked you who you were. I thought I knew everything that mattered because of what job you had. He paused. Do you ever regret coming back into the light? I let the question hang there. The wind picked up a little, tugging at the edge of my jacket. I watched a dust devil dance its way across the ridge. The kind of wind that doesn't carry a single bullet, but still makes you flinch out of habit. For 3 years, I said finally, I thought hiding was healing. I thought being invisible was how I'd atone. He was silent beside me. But some wounds, I continued, they don't start closing until you stop shielding them from the light. I turned to him, fully. The world doesn't need more noise. Doesn't need louder leaders. It needs people who see clearly, act carefully, serve without needing credit. I reached into my pocket and pulled out something small, a weathered coin. My team's old token, given on our last mission together. 12 of us had them once. Only one remained. I pressed it into Rowley's hand. Pass this on someday, I said. To someone who reminds you of who you used to be, and what it cost to become who you are. He swallowed hard. Nodded once. Behind us, Camp Dagger had changed. Not on the map, but in the marrow. Troops trained differently now. With questions. With care. With awareness most rookies don't develop until their second deployment, if they live that long. My classes had grown. Requests for my sessions came in from 3 other regions. Even the brass, guys who used to write me off, sent officers for advanced prep. But none of that mattered as much as one small thing. People saw each other now. Not as ranks. Not as tasks. But as stories. Stories still being written. One morning, a fresh recruit asked me the question that had once haunted me. Major Quinn, he said, wide-eyed and green as morning dew. How do you know when someone's a real leader? I looked him in the eye. When they're willing to carry the weight and never brag about the scars. That afternoon, I poured coffee. Just like always. Not because I had to. Because I chose to. Because some symbols matter more when they're quiet. And as I handed out cups, people didn't just thank me for the caffeine anymore. They thanked me for the lessons, the time, the trust. For seeing them. And for letting myself be seen. The legend of Ghost Rin wasn't something I chased anymore. It wasn't a name I clung to in fear or guilt, or shame. It was just part of the story now. Mine. A second chapter one never thought I'd earn. And the only spotlight I needed was the sunrise hitting my patch every morning. Major Harper Quinn, Phoenix operative. Call sign, Ghost Wren. Still here. Still serving. Not invisible anymore.